Hey everyone, today's video is a really exciting one because it is my monthly reading wrap-up for the month of September. I love watching these monthly reading wrap-up videos from other booktubers and I have a lot of fun making them. I think it's nice to just kind of like wrap up your monthly reading with a bow, give a quick overview of all the books you read, what stood out to you, what maybe disappointed you, and everything in between. And I feel like I always find a good new book recommendation or at least like reshuffle the order of my TBR based on some of these videos. Let's jump into my September reading stats. In September, I read 7 books. I read 1 women's fiction book, 3 fantasy books, and 3 romance books. My total page count for the month was approximately 2,687 pages, and my average star rating for the month was a 3.96 stars, so pretty good. I want to be honest with you guys and share that I was a little bummed out that I only read 7 books this month. I usually like to stay more in the like 8 to 10 range, but I'm having grace with myself because September was just a really busy month for me. I had a lot going on with work. I do work a corporate job in addition to making YouTube videos, and then I also just had stuff going on with friends and family as well. But I'm proud I was able to balance it all, and I feel like I'm just kind of getting my footing with finding the harmony. I'm doing my best. That's all I can do. 7 books is still so great, and I'm really proud of myself. So let's jump in. The first book I read in September was Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer. If you want to see a more in-depth reading vlog, this book is featured in my Weekend in My Life video I posted this month, so definitely check that out. This book is about our main character, Evie Sage, who has a sick father to provide for, so her employment status is imperative. She lives in this kingdom called Renadon. It's just kind of your typical fantasy kingdom. I almost picture it kind of like Shrek, which I know is crazy, but basically Evie needs a job. She stumbles into this guy at the beginning of the book who turns out to be the villain. The entire kingdom calls him the villain. Basically ends up with a job, you guessed it, as the assistant to the villain. So this book just kind of follows Evie's journey being the assistant. She develops this huge crush on her boss. His name, the villain, is Tristan, which you find out pretty soon into the book. Evie and Tristan are teaming up because they think there is a rat or a mole working for the villain who's feeding information about his work and his plans to the king. This was kind of my first fantasy book of the season. I would say it's very like light fantasy. I really loved the beginning and how it started out, and then I felt like it slowed down a bit and then picked back up at the end. This book ends on a huge cliffhanger, so that was kind of a bummer, honestly. The second book just came out, which is called Apprentice to the Villain, and I put that on my October TBR, so I'm hopeful to read it this month. This book was born from an idea of a TikTok series where the author literally made a TikTok role-playing as this like assistant to a villain and like making jokes about all of kind of like the silly tropes. An idea that was born out of like making fun of the tropes kind of just like turned into a book full of the tropes themselves, which is still really fun, but at certain points I felt like it knew it was like making fun of itself. But then at the same time I'm like, wait, maybe it's not. Like, is this just the book? Do you know what I mean? I think I really like the idea of this book, but the execution just at times left me wanting more. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Even though this wasn't my favorite book, it wasn't like super addictive to me. I'm definitely still gonna read the next one because of the cliffhanger that we got left with. I think go into it knowing it's kind of unserious. It's just kind of like a cozy, slow burn romantasy. The next book that I read in September was The Good Part by Sophie Cousins. I actually listened to this one on audiobook and I ended up loving it so much that I ordered a physical copy because I wanted to have it in my library. I had no idea what to expect from this book. I actually kind of randomly chose this for my September TBR. I got the prompt, a book where the main character is your age. So I was Googling and I found The Good Part. This book is about our main character, Lucy, who is 26 and I think she lives in London. It's set in the UK. Lucy's just exhausted. She wants to be a TV producer, so she is currently working as like an assistant and she feels like she does a lot of like scut work. So she's just kind of biding her time, hoping to climb the ladder. And in the meantime, she's getting paid like nothing. She lives with like 4 or 5 roommates. All the while she is single and continuously going on disaster states. And so one night when Lucy stumbles upon this mysterious wishing machine, she puts a coin in and whispers, "Please let me skip to the good part of my life." When she wakes up the next morning with a high-powered job, a ring on her finger, 2 beautiful children, she can't believe her eyes. And so Lucy has to ask herself, can she go back to her old life? And if she can, does she want to? And that's kind of the premise. This book totally surprised me. I'd never read anything by Sophie Cousins before, and I just thought it was outstanding. I gave it a 4.5 stars. The only reason I'm not giving it 5 stars is I just didn't get that like 5-star feeling for whatever reason. I think also throughout the book, I was kind of comparing it to other other stories with similar tropes. This book definitely to me felt a lot like 13 Going on 30. There were a lot of similar like tropes and reactions, which is one of my favorite movies, which is probably why I love this book so much. I often find that when magical realism books focus on the woman's story, her growth, and not so much the romance, there was definitely romance in this book, but it was like a subplot. I like that so much more because I think a lot of times with the magical realism, it is a lot more about like self-discovery for the woman. And I think when we like center Min as like this is a romance story, it kind of like throws me off sometimes because I'm like, no, really, this is Lucy's story. I felt like that was so well done here. I think this book definitely made me more appreciative of my life now at 26 and made me realize like all the things I take for granted about the age that I'm at now. So I felt like this book did exactly what the prompt kind of meant for it to do when I pulled it out of the TBR jar. As soon as I finished this book, I actually texted my friend Abigail and I was like, oh my gosh, you have to listen to this audiobook. I think you would love it. And Abigail loved it. So I just thought we needed to bring her in to get a second opinion. What did you think of the good part?
Okay, not to be dramatic, but it changed my entire perspective on life. So she told me to read it. I believe it was, I don't know, beginning of the week. And I think I had listened to the entire book within the next 2 days. I think I had finished it. I think I texted you. I was like, okay, I finished it.
Yeah.
And it literally changed my entire perspective on life. So I am a single girly, unlike Lottie. Obviously, like, vent a lot about being single and like the dating scene.
Much like Lucy.
Yeah. Yeah. I relate. But I think that she was like, I think this book would help you like kind of shift your perspective and your focus. And it 1000% did. No matter if you're single, if you're dating, if you're in the job you want, if you're in the city you want, whatever, we've all had moments where we're in our 20s and thinking, man, I wish I could just skip to the good part, which is literally the entire premise. If you've ever had that thought, this book will 100% hit home for you. I will be totally transparent. I am not like a fantasy girly or like magical realism girly at all. But I felt like this book had like the perfect amount, like kind of as an intro to me. I've been more open to reading those kinds of books since then. I feel like it's like a good way to dip your toe in that water too. Overall, I would say if you like The Family Man, if you like 13 Going on 30, if you've ever thought, I wish I could skip to the good part, I think that anyone would relate to this book. And for me, I think you gave it, what, 4 stars?
I did 4.5.
I think I just right now I read it at the exact right moment for me. It was completely 5 stars for me. I will say also, if you like audiobooks, it was a great audiobook. I have since tried to find audiobooks that I like as much, and I have literally had to stop them because I'm like, the narrator just isn't as good. And so I will say this audiobook was particularly good as well.
And I'm excited to read more from Sophie Cousins. I want to like look at her backlog. Overall, I just thought it was a really heartfelt read, and I'm so glad I randomly stumbled upon it and ended up reading it. The next book I read in September was Reckless by Elsie Silver. This is the 4th book in the Chestnut Springs series. This book actually wasn't on my September TBR, but I decided I just wanted like a palette cleanser to kind of keep my momentum because I felt a slump coming on and I was like, no, Elsie Silver will keep me out of the slump. And she did. These books are all on Kindle Unlimited too, and I was just really craving a Kindle read. So I literally binged this in like a day and a half. This book surprised me, you guys. I actually gave this one a 4 stars. I've rated all the other Chestnut Springs books like somewhere I think between 3.5 and like 3.75. This has been my favorite by far. And honestly, that surprised me because there's a trope in this book that I was aware of. I won't tell you guys in case you don't know because I don't want to spoil it. But if you know, you know. There's a trope in this book that I thought I was going to absolutely hate, and I was so pleasantly surprised. It was really well done. But basically, this book follows Winter Hamilton and Theo Silva. Winter is Summer's sister. I know, Summer and Winter. But Summer and Rhett's love story is the first book in the series called Flawless. So I was really excited to get to Winter's story. I think the thing that I love about these books is that they're just so bingeable. I swear these books are laced with something. Like, I cannot stop reading them. Is it profound? No. But that's okay. Like, I just want to let myself enjoy things. It doesn't have to be critically acclaimed. Let girls enjoy things. One thing I noted in this book is, I don't know if we have any ACOTAR and Chestnut Springs overlap viewers, but the dynamic between Summer and Winter in this book was high-key giving Farrah and Nesta to me. I feel like there are a lot of parallels. Winter totally had Nesta vibes to me, so if you're like a Court of Silver Flames lover, I think you would like this book. Winter is just like, kind of like her name, like she's a little icy, she's a little like jaded. She's going through a divorce at the beginning of the book, and she's just pessimistic about men and dating. But Theo's just like low-key obsessed with Winter, and it's like the cutest thing ever. It was very like black cat golden retriever, which is some of my favorite. Overall, this is my favorite of the Chestnut Springs series. I'm so glad I got to read Reckless this month. I have Hopeless on my TBR for October, so I'm hoping to finish up the Chestnut Springs series, and then I'm gonna move on to the Rose Hill series. Next up, I read The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. If you want to see a more in-depth reading vlog on this one, that was featured in my fall reset vlog, so definitely check that out. I've now read the big three from Ashley Poston. So I read The 7-Year Slip back in the spring, then I read A Novel Love Story over the summer, and now I've read The Dead Romantic. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I still think The 7-Year Slip is my favorite book from Ashley Poston. The Dead Romantics and The 7-Year Slip felt very similar, but I do feel like The 7-Year Slip is just kind of like a better version of The Dead Romantics. Don't get me wrong, the books are definitely different and have their own personalities and unique stories, but a lot of the themes I felt like were kind of similar. This book is basically a ghost romance. We've got Florence Day, who is a ghost writer, and I did like the play on the fact that she's a ghost writer and then she has a ghost romance. I think that was funny. But she's having major writer's block after this horrible breakup. She usually writes romance books and she thinks love is dead now that she's had this terrible breakup. She's like, I can't do it. She's got a manuscript that's due. She doesn't know what she's gonna do because she literally doesn't have it finished. But just as her manuscript is due, she gets a call that she never wanted to get and she needs to go home for her father's funeral. This book is definitely fun to read in fall. I didn't feel like it was very spooky, but the setting was kind of spooky. Florence actually grew up in a funeral home and that's like what her family does. They own the funeral home back in her small town. So her dad's funeral has been talked about a lot throughout her life because he owned the funeral home. So there's a lot of themes of like death and grieving, ghosts. So for that reason, I was glad I read it in September, but it is set in the spring. So a little paradoxical there since that's like the season of rebirth, but also in a sense, maybe kind of poetic. I love Ashley Poston's writing. I think for me, her writing is what always like boosts the rating. Even if the plot isn't my favorite, I'm like, this writing is just beautiful. There's actually a quote from this book that I want to read to you guys. It's not a spoiler at all, but I just want to share why I love Ashley Poston's writing so much. And I felt like this quote does a good job. The quote says this: "But the parlor was different now, with a new coat of paint, a new owner, new ice cream flavors. However much Marymount stayed the same, it kept shifting ever so slightly. Just enough for me to feel lost, for my past to feel like another lifetime ago." And I sent that to some of my friends and I said, this is what it feels like going back to Athens, Georgia, where we all went to college. Like anytime I go back there, I'm like, wait, this was the pizza shop and now it's like a burger place. It's still a restaurant, it's still there. Athens is still the same, but it's shifting just a little bit. And every time I go, there's like some new thing or something different and it just makes me feel old. But I felt like that was so well captured here. And Ashley Poston just does such a good job capturing those feelings that are really hard to put to words. I just think she's a fantastic writer, and if you like magical realism, I think you'd like this. The next book I read in September was The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. This was another one from my September TBR and my first book by Sarah Adams, so I was excited to get introduced to a new to me author. I gave this book 3 stars, which is not a bad rating, okay guys? I just want to say. I still really enjoyed this book. It was a quick read. I actually read this one the week of my work conference because I was like, I just need something easy and light and short to get through this week while I have so much going on. But I don't know, it just wasn't anything special to me, I guess. The Cheat Sheet follows our 2 main characters, Bree and Nathan. They went to high school together and became unlikely friends, and they both had a crush on each other, but neither were acting on it because I think they were about to go to college. They were going to go to separate colleges. This book is set post-grad, obviously, since Nathan's in the NFL, but I think they're in their like early to mid 20s. I think the thing that like maybe lowered this book a little bit for me is just like it's a little unrealistic for people in their like mid 20s to kind of act the way that Bree and Nathan act. I think if they were in high school, I would have bought this story so much more, but it doesn't really work for the plot because it's so much better for him to like be in the NFL and all that stuff. So it's just like fun and lighthearted. I think I went in with kind of low expectations and then I was pleasantly surprised. I think the thing I loved about this book is that I really do love like a friends to lovers trope when you've been friends for so long, and these two had been harboring crushes on each other for years for it to finally kind of come to life and them to realize like, oh, we both like each other. That tension of like, I don't want to ruin the friendship. I just really love that trope. I think it's so sweet and a lot of the times builds like some of the best relationships. I think this one still had like the right amount of tension for friends to lovers, and it really had me like giggling and kicking my feet. I just felt like the timing was perfect with football being back in September. Where my rating for this book went down just a little bit is that I just didn't love like the last 50 pages, like how this book wrapped up. I understand that romance books have happy endings, but I think when things are like a little too perfect, sometimes I get icked out a little bit. Like I want there to be like a little bit of like realness. It just was like a little too picture perfect in the end for me, so I think that was part of the reason I was like, ugh. But given what I knew about this book, like I'm not surprised that that's how it wrapped up. I would definitely read more from Sarah Adams. I had a really good time reading this. It was fun. I have heard that the When in Rome series from her is most people's favorite, so I'm hopeful to read that one. The next book I read in September is The Unmaking of June Farrow by Adrienne Young. This book is set in the small mountain town of Jasper, North Carolina, so very Appalachian. The setting was gorgeous. I could picture it in my head the whole time, and I was just like Oh, I'm so happy to be here. June Farrow is part of this line of Farrow women who've lived in Jasper for over a century. And the Jasper women are known for basically losing their minds and going crazy. So June's mother, Susanna, also went mad and disappeared. June was raised by her grandmother. So at the beginning of this book, June is mourning the death of her grandmother, and she's starting to get anxious about the fact that she's probably gonna go mad and she has no one to care for her. But she also refuses to have children because she wants this curse to die with her. But she just cannot let go of the fact that her mom went mad and disappeared. She has a lot of questions. So she starts digging for answers, and that's kind of the premise of the story. This book is fantasy, I guess. I included it in the fantasy section of the genre breakdown, but I feel like it's more women's fiction with some magical realism. We can tell I was really into the magical realism this month. There was also mystery to this book because she's trying to solve what happened to her mother. This one was honestly so genre bending. It kind of reminded me of the Ministry of Time in that way. Just a lot going on in this book, honestly, but I really enjoyed this. I actually gave this 4.5 stars. This was just such a unique story. I've really read nothing like this. I also did a little bit of listening to the audiobook with this one as well. I tandem read and listened, and this was an excellent audiobook as well. I highly recommend the audiobook for this one. The narrator did such a good job. It definitely kept me on the edge of my seat and was super bingeable. This book does feature time travel, and I felt like it was done in a pretty good way. I know that time travel can be a little tricky to get right. I thought this book was straightforward enough to follow pretty easily, which I appreciated because I do feel like I've read some time travel books where I'm like, hold up, I have no idea what's going on right now. This book definitely has that like I love you in any lifetime trope, which is really sweet, and I always love that with like a time travel moment. I didn't always agree with the decisions that our main character June was making. I was a bit frustrated with her at times, but I do think that sometimes makes for a more interesting main character because the main character doesn't need to be just like me. It's a quick read, it's really bingeable and really unique, and I definitely recommend it. One of my favorite books of the month for sure. And the last book that I read in September was none other than Fourth Wing. If you're unfamiliar, basically Fourth Wing is about a war college set in this like fantasy world, and there are 4 different quadrants in the war college. There are scribes, foot soldiers, dragon riders, and healers. Our main character in this book, Violet, is part of the rider quadrant, so she's learning to be a dragon rider, and that's where she meets Xaden, who is seemingly the love interest for the whole series. I found Fourth Wing pretty enjoyable. I did like it. I'm not like obsessed with it, but I enjoyed it. I ended up giving this book a 4.25 stars, which I hate to get so granular with the 0.25, but this book was more than a 4-star to me, just not quite a 4.5, so I did kind of land there. I wanted to give this book credit where credit was due because I really had a lot of fun reading it, and like that's part of what matters the most. Like I don't want to be too harsh or critical on this book, and I think it's easy to dog on this book because it's so widely loved and known. I think there were parts of this book that felt a little bit cliche or a little bit like it was taking some of the best parts from the Hunger Games books or the Divergent books or Game of Thrones and kind of putting all of those together in one book. Being more familiar with some of those mainstream stories and then seeing them kind of copy and pasted here a little bit kept me from giving it a full 5 stars. But I do think this is a great intro to fantasy. If you are a romance reader looking to get into fantasy, definitely I think Fourth Wing's a great option. I think the magic system and like the world building are pretty simple. I thought what did make this book bingeable was like the college setting was really fun, the dragons, and then just trying to figure out what was going on like politically. I'm really excited to hopefully read Iron Flame in October. I've heard kind of mixed reviews, so I'm also a little bit nervous, but overall I did really like this book and I'm excited to continue the series. My last video was actually a full Fourth Wing reading vlog with reactions. Definitely check out that video if you haven't seen it and you want to see my full thoughts on this book. And those are the 7 books that I read in September. If you made it this far in the video, comment down below with the football emoji so I can know who made it to the end. Thank you all so much for watching. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss a video from me, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye everyone.